Good morning and welcome to Mosaic. I'm Rabbi Eric Weiss and honored to be your host. Throughout our country, faith communities establish wide-ranging philanthropic organizations to take care of their own needs and to also take care of the communities in which they live. We'd like to invite you into a wonderful conversation with Danny Grossman, who is the CEO of the Jewish Community Federation of Marin and Sonoma Counties, San Francisco, and the Peninsula. Welcome, Danny.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's just jump in. What is the Federation?
So the Federation was formed with the idea of ensuring a flourishing Jewish community. And so we play the role of a catalyst, a convener, a planner, a funder, a central address for the community that can ensure that we flourish.
And federations have a history throughout our country. They exist in different, mostly urban Jewish communities around the country. So can you talk a little bit about what the history of federations across the country is?
Absolutely. So there are more than 150 of them around the country. They were formed with the idea of bringing the community together, of ensuring that there was a fundraising arm for the community, a planning arm for the community, and the federations in many situations built Jewish communities around the country with their partners.
And so our federation region serves San Francisco, City and County, Marin and Sonoma County, and the Peninsula down throughout essentially the whole of Mountain View.
Correct.
So in our particular federation, what does the federation do?
Okay. So we have a large region, as you gather, geographically, relative to many urban federations. In this region, first of all, what we do is we convene our partners and we together collaborate and plan on what the needs of the community are, how we're going to meet them. We then raise the funds, sometimes in collaboration with them, to ensure that those needs are fulfilled. We determine what the greatest needs of the community are and direct the funds in that direction. But we have many ancillary services like pro bono consulting and capital planning for agencies that are looking to create buildings. In addition, we have a philanthropic service arm which provides services to Jewish philanthropists who want to engage both in philanthropy in the Jewish community and beyond the Jewish community.
And so the Bay Area at large, we know, is so diverse and vast, and the ways in which people identify, however they identify in the world, is just very complex. So how do we, within our Jewish community, understand that complexity when it comes to our Jewish community and then how the Federation goes about its work?
Great question, and something different. Even though we were always diverse as a community, we are so much more diverse now as a community in the way that we identify, in the way that we practice and affiliate. So we as a federation have said that the goal that we'd like to pursue for and with the community is to double engagement of Jews in this community. That raises all the questions that you just identified. So what is engagement? How do we define it? Is it self-defined? Is it defined by someone else? What's meaningful? What engagement is meaningful? So all of these important questions are ones that we will bring our partners around the table to answer as we pursue this goal.
So can you talk a little bit about what we might think of as the values base behind the organizational structure? We have civic organizations like the United Way. We have faith-based organizations like Catholic Charities, Presbyterian Services, Episcopal Services, and in some ways they are technically all secular organizations that kind of function as a community chest and a think tank and offer services to meet the needs of the community. But faith-based organizations have, in their own way, a particular value system that drives them that sometimes is not exactly the same as what you might think of as a solely economic driver.
Absolutely. We often have this discussion about the universal versus the particular, because many of the values that we're talking about are universal values. The ideas related to social justice or healing the world. What's particular to the Jewish community is thousands of years of thinking and teaching discourse, dispute about those issues that have left a body of material that's incredibly rich, that enables us to really challenge each other and think about the highest fulfillment of these values and these principles.
We're going to have a quick break and come back to this conversation with Danny Grossman, the CEO of the Jewish Community Federation of Marin and Sonoma Counties, San Francisco, and the Peninsula in just a moment. Please join us back here on Mosaic. Is somebody can donate money to the Federation that essentially then gets redistributed to agencies in need to provide services to people in need. Another one is that if somebody has the economic blessings to set up a fund, that they can actually come to the Federation with their economic blessing and set up a fund at the Federation and receive philanthropic services back. And then also, people can come in with different ideas to particularly execute to the service of the community. And then also, I know the Federation brings services back into the community in terms of volunteer work, attorneys, accountants, strategic planners that then can come into an agency and help an organizational structure function better. Exactly. Anything else?
No, it's very well said. You know, I will say that when one's vision is to ensure a flourishing Jewish community, that suggests there's a lot of things that we might do. Within that, we try and focus on the particular and most acute and most important needs of the community. You discussed at the very front end the idea of giving to Federation. We think of that, if one wants to invest in a flourishing Jewish community, that's like a mutual fund. And you don't pick stocks. You don't say, well, I'll give it to this or that agency. Let me give it to the fund, and then the fund will ensure that those dollars will go to the most important needs of the community. That's how we think about that. And I'll only add that when it comes to the philanthropic engagement, I would say that one doesn't have to have extraordinary means to be part of our philanthropic services side. One could open a donor-advised fund with just a few $1,000s and take advantage of the services that we provide, the tax opportunities, but also the Jewish philanthropic education, which is important.
So how does an organization that has philanthropic capacity and other capacities to help make its decisions about what the world might think of as priorities or strategic directions or a way of articulating its vision?
So that's a very important question. The first, of course, is based on data. So we as a federation routinely conduct a community study, a demographic study. We're about to embark on the next one for our community after, I think it's been about 12 years. And we have a breakthrough new approach to that study. But it starts with that data. In other words, who are we? What do we need? Where are we? How are we identifying? From there, then we gather people from the community to say, look, let's think about where the needs are most acute. And those are not easy decisions. Obviously, in the three fundamental realms of work that we operate, engaging and educating the Jewish community, caring for the vulnerable, and ensuring a just and civil society in Israel, there are acute priorities across all of those areas. But it's only as a collective that we think we can get to the best decisions.
So it's a big question, but for anybody that comes into a self-reflective capacity and thinks about, well, who am I in the world? And then what's my place in the world? There's always that level at which one thinks about one's own self, one's own community, and then responsibility to the broader community. And we live in a community where being Jewish involves people in your family who are not Jewish, and being Jewish involves a tremendous amount of effort toward the community that isn't Jewish, and lots of different levels. So how do we have that conversation among ourselves?
I'm glad you asked that question. You know, I told you part of our vision, which is to ensure a flourishing Jewish community. The back end of that is to be a force for good in the world. And when we say the world, we don't mean the Jewish world. We mean the world. So there's a few elements to what you raised. The first is to be inclusive of people who identify as Jewish, whether there's a strict law about who is and who isn't or not. We want to be inclusive. My mother was not Jewish and never converted, and was not really included in this community, and as a consequence sort of stayed in the background. And I hope that others don't feel that. The other part of your question then relates to how we as Jews engage in the world beyond us, and that's critically important, because this is not just about ensuring our own welfare, it's about force for good in the world. So we have those conversations about where those priorities are, and that relates directly to our work in philanthropic education.
You know, we're going to take a break in just a moment, but part of what you're saying, I think, comes down to just a really honest, transparent, basic reality, which is that whatever any of us build, it always starts with a single relationship, and how we multiply relational issues so that everybody does feel that they matter, and that that's what drives the broader vision, rather than some vision that forces individually people to comply with something they actually don't agree with. So we're going to come back in just a moment here on Mosaic. Please join us. Welcome back to Mosaic. I'm Rabbi Eric Weiss. We're in the middle of a wonderful conversation with Danny Grossman, who's the CEO of the Jewish Community Federation of San Francisco, Marin and Sonoma Counties in the Peninsula. Welcome back, Danny.
Thank you.
We were talking about the ways in which organizations make decisions about the kinds of philanthropic decisions they make and services that they offer to the community for the sake of really building a vibrant community. What do you think, it's so hard, I know, to predict the future. None of us really can. But what are some of the things you think that are important to have in mind so that we do meet the future with confidence, and poise ourselves for what we think success is going to be? What are maybe some of the ideas or the principles or ways of thinking that you think are important for us to pay attention to?
Yeah, I think we're in a pivot point of a Jewish community that, unfortunately, and for reasons we understand, had a fear-based message about identification with Judaism. It was what?
Fear-based, you said.
Fear-based. Fear-based, meaning we are, we have to draw together, we have to protect ourselves, we are the subjects of anti-Semitism. Again, understandable. I'm not judging it at all. I understand it. Today's younger generations don't understand that. They don't feel the fear, at least in this community. They don't see Israel as vulnerable as it once was, and they want to understand what the value proposition of Judaism is. What's important about identifying with the Jewish community, and we've got to get much better about articulating that and expressing what that is. That's not, again, based on fear, but based on the beauty and the value associated with Jewish life.
When you use the term value proposition, meaning that somebody sees Jewish life as something that will give them succor, that will nourish them, that will give them comfort through hard times, inspire them.
Yes, excite them. They can identify in many ways. 100 years ago, you didn't really have the choice about what your identity was. Today, one can choose. And one can choose beyond a faith-based message. One can say, well, my identity is as a surfer, or as a writer, or as a Jew. But why? Well, for all the reasons you mentioned, because of the deep tradition that brings comfort, that brings inspiration, that brings obligation and responsibility.
So, it's a fascinating thing, I think, particularly in the Bay Area, that we in our country are sort of the end of manifest destiny, not to leave out Alaska or Hawaii, but we have a natural border to our continent, and so we embody that, I think, in the ways of being sort of on the cutting edge of things. And there's a lot of academic history that says that the Jewish community currently will be west to the east rather than east to the west. I'm wondering, in that context then, what are some of the things that we see, particularly in the world of inclusion, that are going to become maybe mainstream into the future? I think of the issue of Jews of color, or LGBT Jews, or Jews in interfaith relationships, or all the different ways in which Jewish identity itself can change. What are some of the things you think that are kind of burgeoning up here that actually are going to be the prairie fires, so to speak,
right.
east?
Right. And I'm proud to say, as you acknowledge, that this community and this federation have been on that cutting edge in defining new approaches that do typically roll in a wave eastward. So we are looked at for those reasons. You mentioned one significant realm, which is the realm of identification and acceptance. You know, who is in the tent, and how do we include them? And we must be much better about that. The next realm, I think, is the realm of expression. We used to think of ourselves, well, if you're Jewish, you go to synagogue and you pray on certain days, and there are so many different ways to be Jewish now, so many exciting, inspired ways that are based on Jewish tradition and history. And I think it's about accepting those and really offering those in the vein that I said before. What is the value proposition of identifying as a Jew?
Wonderful. We're going to take a quick break and come back in just a moment here on Mosaic. Welcome back to Mosaic. I'm Rabbi Eric Weiss, and honored to be your host this morning. We're in the middle of a wonderful conversation with Danny Grossman, who is the CEO of the Jewish Community Federation of Marin, Sonoma, and San Francisco Counties on the Peninsula. Welcome back, Danny.
Thank you.
So, what about you more personally? What draws you to this work?
Well, I was born and raised here in this community, and I care deeply about it. I was very involved Jewishly in this community in a youth movement that took me to Israel for a year after high school. And when I came back after my first career in the diplomatic service, it was with the explicit objective of helping to build community, because I just think it's that important, and it's not something we should take for granted. So I looked at the Federation and other ideas in the Jewish world, and I said, there's only one organization that really looks out for the broadest interests of the community, and that's where I want to be. That's my interest. So that's why I made the decision to cross from a career in the private sector, and before that, as I said, in government, into the foundation community building world.
And so the skill set that you bring to this particular work is from the world of diplomacy and then the world of business.
Correct.
So those are two really interesting amalgams.
Yes.
Together. So can you talk a little bit more about sort of that skill set in the Federation? Because certainly I think on the face of it, and not to be cute about it, that this kind of work involves business model thinking and diplomacy and a lot of other stuff in between.
It does.
Yeah.
It does, and even beyond that, my previous role after diplomacy was in starting a couple of companies, and those were companies that were very focused on product development and innovation. And the best thinking about product development and innovation is finding out the needs from the people who will enjoy those products, right? And then integrating that in a brainstorm design thinking approach, and then bringing the product to market. When we think about what the strategic needs of the community are, back to your question earlier, we think, well, let's ask them, what do they need? And then let's brainstorm the kinds of products that might make sense. So yes, the diplomatic skills are helpful in dealing with and between our agencies and with our donors. Yes, the practical business skills are helpful in management and strategy and others, but right now I'm really experiencing the value of 20 years of developing innovative product. So,
and yes, and faith-based communities tend to have products that are essentially human experience. So how, it's a big question, but how do we test human experience?
Wow. You know, I think we observe it. You know, the good news for us is that there is, especially here, as you said, in this incubator of interesting and new ideas, there are so many places to watch that human experience and understand what's powerful, understand what's meaningful, and where the trends are going. Not easy. The founders of IDEO talk about the secret sauce is in the observation of people's experience. But that is where the answer is, I think.
You know, there's so much wisdom out there, and the Jewish Community Federation supports in part the Bay Area Jewish Healing Center, which we're thankful for. And one of the things that I find fascinating when we look at in our little niche of success is that when we look at our volunteers, curiosity and a sense of humor are two of the most significant personality characteristics that make for actually a successful volunteer. And that then can dictate a lot about the human experience of supporting a volunteer. And I'm wondering, I'm just wondering sort of in your work, are there human characteristics that you have just observed actually are the ones that help drive a vibrant community?
You said one of them. Curiosity, I think, is so powerful. And we tend to shut it down the older we get because we want to look like we know everything. So we don't express that curiosity, and we fail to learn, and we don't really hear what people are saying. Whether I'm speaking with a donor or speaking to an agency partner or speaking to someone, a member of the community, I try and summon that curiosity and not want to project the idea that I know everything.
That's so fascinating. So we have just a little bit of time left, but in a word or two, what's your hope for our common future?
So, you know, I think we spring from magnificent values, and we've already as a community done extraordinary things, especially in this community, not just for ourselves, but beyond. And I hope that we continue to do that and find that path. And I encourage anyone listening to this program to get involved with us, with anyone else. The Federation will welcome your donation. They will welcome your arrival at our endowment fund with our philanthropic services. We'll welcome you as a volunteer if you want to come to us and say, we'd like to be involved in pro bono consulting.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day here on Mosaic, and thank you for joining this wonderful conversation with us and Danny Grossman.